Over the last 50 years, women have continued to pave the way, push the boundary, and become the forefront of the conversation. From playing to coaching to advising and so much more, women have made history in sports. Now it's time to put that history on full display and allow these influential women to tell her story. I'm Brie Andras, and as a woman in the sports world myself, I know there's so much more to these athletes and those that shape them other than what they're able to do in competition. While the buckets, stuck landings, home runs, and wins on top of wins do mean a lot, I'm looking to find the story of how people got to where they are in women's sports and how they've seen the game grow. I'm also looking to find out who they are behind their sport. This is the Her Story podcast. All right, Miss Karen McCord, welcome to the Her Story podcast.
Thank you for having me. I so appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. So to our viewers that don't know, Miss Karen is the mother of Carley McCord, a late sports reporter here in Baton Rouge, New Orleans, Louisiana area, everywhere. And Carley tragically passed away in a plane crash in 2019 when she was on her way to one of LSU's playoff games in Atlanta. And since then, Miss Karen has written a very amazing book called Only Rainbows, the Carley McCord Story, detailing her life and her journey through her career and everything in between, from childhood all the way through adulthood. And I read the entire thing. It was incredible.
Thank you so much. It came from the heart.
Yes.
And God. I really do believe it was written by both of those places.
So my first question I have for you is, why did you decide to write a book about Carley?
You know, I get this question quite a bit, and there is a specific answer. And I knew actually the day that I found out about the accident. I just had this, I have to write another book. I wrote an earlier book. Mm-hmm. It was very small, and it was just for, special purposes and everything. But I felt it at that moment. But then 2 weeks later, Tom Rinaldi came over to do a spot for the SEC or the national championship mm-hmm. game. And he came over, and I said, Tom, you knew Carley, write the book for her. And he looked at me, he said, no, Karen, I can't write the book for her. It's got to be in your voice. You need to write the book. And so when the Shakespeare of sports mm-hmm. tells you you have to write the book,
yeah,
you write the book.
Yeah, Tom is, I met him actually that same season. I think this is when he was with, maybe it was College Game Day.
Yes.
When they were in town, was it the Florida game of 2019 when mm-hmm. LSU played Florida? I was in student media at LSU. And with Tiger TV, uh-huh. and he came and spoke to us there, and he was just like a master of words. Like anything he said was like incredible.
Yes, and he gives back to a lot of the journalism students. For example, Carley interviewed him quite a few times as an undergraduate student, and then when she was actually a reporter. Mm-hmm. And he always was so very kind and supportive of it, of
yeah.
her. And that's important. That's an important quality for the older mentors to give to the young mentees.
Yeah, so Carley, you detail her life from even before she was born, just the journey of how she, came into this world and everything. When did Carley really start to show interest in sports that kind of, led her to the career she was in?
Probably in college. Mm-hmm. She winded up being a pageant girl, but not because it was kind of a duress thing, and you read mm-hmm. that in the book. And but while she won her university title, which was Miss Northwestern, and it is called Lady mm-hmm. of the Bracelet. And when she was Miss Lady of the Bracelet, she would go sing for sporting events. She'd go into football, basketball, baseball. She'd start covering the game. She would start meeting people and everything. And all of a sudden, she realized, I like this, and mm-hmm. I have a penchant for this.
Yeah.
And so that's when she went into sports. She never played sports as a child. She was a water girl at one moment, I think a blink of a second. So I guess we could call that her introduction to sports, but not really. Mm-hmm. And really, it wasn't till very much later, and it took her all the way to the NFL. And what people don't realize was that she was a very important cog in the NFL network, because she was a character scout. And we'll probably get into that later. But for somebody to go from one extreme to another, it is quite a story.
Yeah. I was telling you before we started that I just noticed so many character traits about Carley that I resonated with, that I was like, oh my gosh, I'm the same way. Just the fact that she was so headstrong, and like, even if she changed her mind every 5 minutes, she was like, this is what I'm gonna do, and I'm dead set on it. What was it like kind of raising her, knowing that like she was gonna change her mind and didn't know what, what you were gonna get out of her every day?
Right. Yeah, she was definitely random and definitely silly. I mean, as a child, she wanted to be an ostrich. I can't answer. I can't answer.
Like the bird?
Like the bird, the ostrich. And so all of a sudden, all the kids in the neighborhood and in her class wanted to be ostriches. So, she started this at a very young age, and then she wanted to be a beautician or whatever they call them, and whatever they call them today. But she wanted to cut hair, I'm like, just be the best hair cutter you can be. And but she would always throw some random career at us. And so when she said, I'm going to be a sports, broadcaster, we're like, okay, but actually Carley's degree is in criminal justice with a minor in Spanish.
Yeah.
And so she actually did a lot of undercover work, which supported her role. As she started to learn sports, she also had the criminal justice background. And so when she did get her big break with the Cleveland Browns as a character scout, she had all of those nuggets lined up.
Yeah, I think that's so funny, because I didn't play sports growing up either. Well, I did very briefly here and there, recreationally, nothing like, oh, I'm gonna go D1 type of thing.
Right.
But I think it was my early college days that I was like, well, I grew up watching it, and I grew up in a family that lived and breathed LSU and the Saints and everything like that, from a baseball, football, everything kind of perspective. So to just jump into it is kind of scary, but you guys seem kind of like my parents that were like, you have this dream, you have to have the work ethic to go for it. And it seemed like she knew that from the very beginning, that it wasn't going to be easy, but she had to put the work in to get where she was.
Oh, she definitely knew that. And I'll give you an example. When she she always called it first loser, because she was first loser in Miss America, not Miss America, Miss Louisiana twice. When she came off the stage the last time, and she said, Mom, I'm going to Cleveland. And I'm like, you're going to Cleveland? And she said, yeah, I've got my big break there with the Cleveland Browns. And, that's scary. That's scary for a mom. It's scary, for parents.
For her to move across the country.
To move across the country for a $24,000 a year job. And when she got there, she goes, oh, Mom, don't worry. I have a roommate. And I said, a roommate? You don't even know anybody there? And she goes, no, don't worry about it. She said, they checked him, and we found him on Craigslist, and he's okay. So it's all kind of scary things that we had to face. But in the end, I knew I couldn't stop her.
Yeah.
In the end, I knew that was her dream. And if she was going to make that kind of sacrifice, I had to go with it.
Did you know from the time she was a very young age that she was going to do something different than the norm and, be the best at it?
I did. But also the other thing I knew was instinctively, I knew she wasn't going to live long. And that scared me as a parent. From the day she was born, I looked at her little lifeline, and I'm not a palmologist, don't ask me about any of that, but it was very short. And I just could remember at that moment panicking. And I always knew that I would outlive Carley. And it wasn't like something I knew, like if you'd asked me, how's everything going? I'm panicking today. But I instinctively knew that I would outlive her.
It was just kind of something that was in the back of your mind all the time?
Always. And so, going on these adventures really it was very unnerving for me. But as a mom and as an educator and hopefully as a good parent, I had to let her fly, and she did it very well.
It seemed like, in her short life, she lived a very full life. She didn't look like she had breaks at all. She was just go, go, go at all times. Was she like that as a younger child too?
Always, always. You know, she lived fast. I think she had the same instinct that I had. You know, we never talked about it between us, but I do think she had an instinct that she had to go fast because she didn't have much time. And she also did this with her mentoring. Like, she felt as though she was 24, 25, 26, and she needed to give back to younger students at a very early age. You know, she would always have a student on the sideline with her, always. You know, if you called her up and said, Carly, can I be on the sideline with you? She would go, absolutely, come on. And a lot of people would ask her, well, aren't you afraid that that student one day will take your job? Because it's a very competitive business.
Absolutely.
And, you know, and she said, nope, because if they're better than me, they deserve the job. But she always had that wisdom about her. And I don't know, maybe she did know, or maybe that was just her destiny, you know.
Yeah. Well, whenever she started her career in sports, it was kind of like all over the map and everywhere. She started as, like you said, a character scout for the Cleveland Browns after meeting their general manager through pageantry, correct?
No, actually, it was through Tiger Television.
Okay.
Funny story. I'll make it quite brief. She was there on Pro Day. And
that's true.
And,
she went on to talk to him.
Yeah, and she got there earlier than Michael Lombardi did. And Michael Lombardi came up to him. It was when they were going to draft Barkevious Mingo and from the LSU Tigers. And she got there about 6, 7 in the morning, whatever time it was, but it was quite early. She got all set up and everything, and Michael Lombardi walked up to her and said, "Excuse me, ma'am, this is my spot." And she goes, "Excuse me, sir, I didn't see you put your stuff in, and I got here before you, so you could stand next to me." She had no idea who he was until
I don't think
he
it would have
started
mattered.
No, I don't think it would have mattered. I don't think it would.
She seemed very high strung and like, she's gonna do it how she wants to do it. She didn't care who you are.
Right. She didn't care that he was the general manager looking at Barkevious Mingo. And throughout the day, they struck up a conversation. And eventually she figured out who he was. But I don't know if she ever let on or not. But he offered her the job. And that's how it went.
Being a scout in the NFL, especially as a woman, is very rare. It's becoming more common now, which is great, but it was very rare even 10, 15 years ago. For her to do that, that says a lot about just who she is. And what do you, from your perspective, from the outside looking in, what was that experience like for her those few years in Cleveland?
She absolutely took the job and ran with it. She was in a man's world. I mean, she was the only woman in the draft room. She actually got to sit in the draft room, in the war rooms, and watch how they would draft or how they would think about drafting people if this one was being taken and this one wasn't being taken. She was a character scout, so she had to go and do her undercover work. And that brings me back to the earlier part of the conversation. She was a criminal justice major, so she knew how to do undercover work, and she would actually sit in bars and go to spring break and look at the behavior of these guys, which was a very new concept in 2013.
Yeah.
It's probably way more common now.
Absolutely.
But she would embrace that, and her cover was she worked for Vic Carucci and Nathan Zagara, and she would intern for them. And so a lot of people around Cleveland thought she was not just a sports reporter, but they had no idea that she had the character scout.
Yeah, and after a few years, she moved back home, and I'm sure that was great for you and your family to have her back. And she wore many different hats in Baton Rouge and New Orleans and all kind of different things. Just how do you think she was able to get that many gigs, all at one time, and being able to convince not only her bosses, but even you guys that no, I can handle this much?
She was so persistent, and she never accepted no. And I don't want to sidetrack, so keep me on track if not. But one of the beauties of this book is that, when you get in your 20s and 30s, you don't realize how hard it is to really be impactful in your career. And so she realized at a very young age that I need to be persistent. I do not need to accept no. I need to go farther. If this door closes, let me look at another way to get into this door to fulfill my dream. She was always looking for an avenue that if this closed, this one would open. And that was her kryptonite. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember who it was, but someone high up in the business gave me some very powerful advice, saying, if someone tells you no, you're talking to the wrong person. So
exactly
ask someone else.
That's exactly right.
She was just, from what you described in the book, just relentless at she was going to get her dream job come hell or high water.
Yes, she was. And she was told by a very prominent agent in the sports industry in, I think it was in New York, and he sent her the reel. This was after Michael Lombardi had lost his job, and they had to clean house at Cleveland Browns, and it was time for her to come home, and she was looking for a new job. And he said, "I was really very disappointed in your reels." He said, "They were just not what I expected. You really don't have what it takes to be in this business." And 5 years later, when she got on with the New Orleans Saints, she wrote a Facebook post, "Watch me now," and thank you for rejecting me because it just made me better.
Yeah, I have this tattoo on my arm says "I can and I will," and it basically just symbolizes that even though you may be doubted in life, that like you're not going to take no for an answer, and if someone doesn't believe in you, that doesn't matter, because all you have to do is believe in yourself.
That's true, and it's so true, and it's so true with the book. Because to get a nationally best-selling book, it's probably 1 in a trillion. And I don't know if that statistic is correct, but you don't understand. It's like breaking into show business. But I instinctively know if I work it every day, this book is going to hit national. Because I have to have it hit nationally, because that was Carley.
Yeah.
She was persistent, and she was going to go until she hit her dreams.
I wanted to talk to you about kind of the format of the book. If the viewers that are watching this have not heard of this book, go get it. Only Rainbows, the Carley McCord story. At the beginning of every chapter, you have an italicized a story that was more present day, and then it goes to the more chronological things. What made you decide to do it that way, and why did you do it that way?
I don't know. I think it truly, and that sounds vague, I don't know, but the book evolved that way, and I really do believe that it was part God. And that sounds strange, but the book was written not on computer at all. It was written by mind, heart, hand. I wrote everything, and my little notes were all over the place. Yes, no, this, that. And I have probably a notebook like this, and I interviewed over 100 people getting these notes. And so when I started to put it together, I started to type it out, and I'm like, I can't do this just in grief. It was too hard for me to do it in just the grief form. I couldn't come from it from just tragedy. I had to come from it from love. And that's what as I started to put it together, the book begins as a tragedy, but it ends as a love story between mom and daughter, and that I did my job as mom. And so when I put it as the italics and the not, it started out as, I can't just write it like that, but it also was a gift to me to write it like that. Does that answer your question?
No, it does.
Yeah.
I was just curious. I think it's a beautiful way to tell the story, because in a lot of the stories you tell in the italicized text usually correlates to whatever the story is chronologically. So I think that's beautiful. Nobody knows you like your mother does, especially as a girl. I know no one knows me like my mom does.
That is true. But it was also quite unique in the fact that as you get older, your mom doesn't know you as much, because she doesn't know your work relations and your other friendships that you might have at work and everything. So I was able to delve into those relationships, and I was able to put together that my morals and my values, not my morals, my family's morals and values and education and Catholic education that we gave her crystallized into her being a really cool adult.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. So I was reading just how busy she was in, the last few years. Like, she was working at 104.5 with Matt Moscona, and then she was the in-game host for the Pelicans and then the Saints too, all at the same time. She got the part-time sports reporter role at WDSU in New Orleans, all these different things. I was wondering, because they tell us and they pound this into us in journalism school, that even if you grew up a fan of a team, you're not a fan when you're a sports reporter.
Correct.
But whenever Carley is an in-game host, it's her job to, lift up the fan base. And then sometimes she's doing the in-game hosting and then going report for WDSU like in the same time. How do you think she was able to kind of separate the two, being like an unbiased media person and then also being a fan, because that's what she grew up around?
Well, it was so funny because she would go and she would do all the in-game host, and she'd put all the garb on, and Gail Benson would have to approve her and, do that sort of thing. And then when she would go to the press conferences afterwards, she would have to change clothes. And so she would have to change clothes and hold the WDSU mic and that sort of thing. So there were many a times she would actually sit, she would call it the prime real estate of the 50-yard line of the Superdome, and she'd put on her makeup and she'd switch her shirt from Saints to Pelicans to, to just a neutral color. And you're exactly right. Like, you cannot wear the colors as a fan,
Exactly.
You can't. And so very rarely did she wear like the purple and gold. And this is kind of a morbid fact, but it is probably a fact, is that she was probably, when she was on the plane going to the the semifinals to the national championship, she probably was the only one that was not in LSU colors because, because she was going as a reporter.
I actually thought that it was a beautiful story. It was the Oklahoma game when LSU was playing Oklahoma in the semifinals. I'm sure many Tiger fans remember Joe Burrow throwing like 5 touchdowns just in the first half alone. Was that kind of a beautiful ending, kind of finding some kind of solace or comfort in the fact that they went out there and absolutely dominated, and, Coach Ensminger said they did it for Carley?
Yeah. I really have to say, number one is that, Carley would have said, Coach, you go out there and do your job. She would have never wanted him to stay back. And for Coach Steve, can't you imagine, this is one of the biggest highlights of your life, and then all of a sudden one of the biggest, probably the biggest tragedy of his life. And he honored her by putting that many points on the board for her. And he always would tell the story, Brady would turn to him and ask, Coach, is that enough points? Should we, let our foot off the accelerator? And he goes, no, because we have to do it for Carley. So I think that was his way of honoring her, for sure.
For those that don't know, Carley was married to Stephen Ensminger Jr., the son of legendary LSU offensive coordinator Steve Ensminger. He was offensive coordinator when Joe Burrow and the Coach O and the Jamar and Justin and the undefeated perfect season in 2019. And he went and coached that game shortly after finding out of Carley's passing. I can't imagine, doing something like that. But, kudos to him for being able to, work through it and honor her in such a great way, especially because she was so involved in the sports world of it all. And it meant more than, just any other football game. Do you still feel Carley's presence, at sporting events all the time?
All the time. And one thing that it's so surreal sometimes, because I love the start of football season, but I hate the start of football season. I know that sounds quite odd, but it's just like, or I hate the start of baseball season. I hate the start of basketball season, and it's just because she covered all the sports, and every time, I see somebody, a lady on television, it's just such a reminder, and it's just such a visible reminder. But I do have a really fun story to tell. In 2020, of course, because she died the end of 2019, so 2020 came, and of course COVID and all of that hit, and when the next football season occurred, the 2020 football season, you know, it was a very unique season.
Yes. I don't even remember that season. It feels like a fever dream.
It does. It does feel like a fever dream. But interestingly, the opening game of LSU, there was a huge rainbow over Tiger Stadium. The opening game of the New Orleans Saints season, there was a huge rainbow over the, I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
Hair was in the eyes, was over the Superdome.
I was going to ask you about that too, because whenever I first got the book, I was wondering why it was called Only Rainbows. And throughout the entire book, you describe instances in which Carley symbolized, you know, there's always rainbows after rain, and that is reiterated so many times.
It is.
You, since her passing, you've seen rainbows in the most crucial moments. Is that when you feel the closest to her?
Yes, I do. And there's sometimes, like, I know this sounds strange, but I feel her right now.
Really?
Yeah, I feel like she's with us right now, going, Mom, you know, you're doing it.
Yeah.
You know.
I was actually driving the other day, and this was while in the midst, I was maybe halfway through the book, and I was just driving to work or something, and it was right after, it was like an afternoon thunderstorm, and I saw a rainbow.
Did you?
And I didn't know Carley personally, but because I read this book, I felt connected to it, and I was like, okay, I get it now. Like, I see it, and I get it, and I think that's so beautiful. Carley really resonated with the Andy Grammer song.
She did. We met Andy Grammer in February.
Really?
We did.
Awesome.
Well, she knew Andy Grammer because actually after the Cleveland Browns, she worked for
the radio station.
For the radio station,
right.
And she was kind of like, if you could relate to it in today's time, it's kind of like the Kelly Raspberry.
Yes. Yeah.
So
my mom listened to that when I was growing up.
Right. So anyway, so that was the role she played. So she met a lot of, like, Matthew McConaughey, Andy Grammer. She sang with a lot of people. She just knew a lot of famous people, and so she and Andy Grammer sang together a few times. And so you know, when she died, he made a tribute to her, and he sang "Only Rainbows After Rain." And you know, if you're interested in seeing this, you could YouTube it. And, you know, he sang it, and then so he came to New Orleans in February. We gave him the book. We, you know, held it up and everything. Wound up giving him the book, and you know, hugs and love, and you know, talked to him and his wife. You know, and so it was fun. You know, but Andy Grammer plays you know, absolutely knows her or knows of the story.
Yeah. I noticed in the book, throughout the book, that after she passed, so many people, very, you know, high acknowledgement and famous people in the world reached out to either pay her tributes and their respects or condolences. Did that surprise you at all?
Yes, it surprised me tremendously. And one of the things is because, as we said earlier, your mom knows everything. The only thing, one of the biggest parts we didn't know was we knew she was a character scout in Cleveland, but we really didn't know to the extent because she kind of had to keep it on the down low.
Right.
So, so when all of a sudden the South Carolina Panthers was paying her a moment of silence, the New Orleans Saints, the Cleveland Browns. Well, we understood the New Orleans Saints and the Cleveland Browns, but we didn't understand the Philadelphia Eagles or the New England Patriots. You know, why were these people, you know, honoring Carley? I mean, I get it, but she was a sports reporter, but, you know, she wasn't like somebody that would be, you know.
She didn't work for their organization.
Or at least I didn't think so.
Right.
But she was very much high into the NFL. Like Bill Belichick knew who she was. And, you know, a lot of those people knew who she was. And we were not privy to that because the nature of the job was to be so, you know, kind of selective and secretive. Not secretive.
Yeah. Did it kind of warm your heart to know how many people she's impacted just with her presence, just how many people knew and loved her?
Yes, absolutely. And I am going to say, please don't think that I'm bragging, but it's probably in the thousands, you know. And going back to the famous people, I can remember Mark Cuban, and you know who Mark Cuban is, and he's the Texas, right?
Dallas Mavericks.
Dallas Mavericks.
He owns the Dallas Mavericks. Or he did, I think. I don't know what's the deal with
at
that.
the time he did. And Carley was taking a picture, and she goes, "Mom, this man is stalking me." And And I texted her back, well, then call the police right now. And she goes, Mom, look again, it's Mark Cuban.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, you know, it's like, you know, from the Mark Cubans all the way down to, like I told you, the janitor in the Superdome called me up. The parking lot attendant, Henry, called me up to say, I'm sure going to miss my girl, because she used to bring me Reese's peanut butter cups because I would make her park next to Sean Payton so she wouldn't get out the Superdome so late and walk by herself. And then another interesting one was Zulu, the organization of Zulu, all of a sudden started painting a coconut for Carley every year in honor of Carley and one of the other sports reporters that died in New Orleans as well. And when I called David Hudson to thank him, I said, thank you so very much for doing this. It's just such an honor. And he goes, she was my girl. And I said, did you know her? And he goes, no, never met her, but she was my girl. I just knew her.
Yeah,
you know?
I think when people read this book, it's definitely relatable. And even if you didn't know Carley, like I've never met her, but I felt so connected, and I felt like I was like, oh, like we would have been best friends. Like she would have been like an older sister. Like that's exactly what I got from that. I wish I could have met her, but reading this like gave me a lot of like hope in my career that, you know, I know that this is possible.
Right, and you know, she would have been very supportive of you, and that goes back again to the earlier conversation. If you're better than me, take the job. That was her philosophy.
Yeah.
And so, but it was always because she knew that she could outwork you. You know, she strategically knew if you were better than her, you deserve it, because she would work morning, noon, and night. And Matt Moscona said something very interesting one time to me. He said, Karen, she always outworked her competition. So if her competition, or he didn't say this part of it, but if her competition outworked her, she would gladly, you know, say, you've earned it.
I feel like I was the same way. When I was in college, I had 2 jobs. I was hustling. Anytime I went to an event and I saw someone from a major network, I would always go up to him, introduce myself, not even just for a picture, but just ask like, what's, you know, some advice that you have, like for a young reporter trying to make it, trying to know like, what's the secret in order to make it to these big networks and stuff like that. But, and one thing that I've always been told is, especially because you're a woman, you have to work twice as hard.
You did.
Just to be taken seriously. Because a lot of the times there's women in sports and they're like, oh, well, she doesn't know anything. She's just there to be a pretty face. And then you start talking ball and, you know, every man in the room is looking around like, what do you know about that? Exactly.
And, you know, that is one thing. First of all, Lou Rollins, I don't know if you know who Lynn Rollins is.
Lynn Rollins, yes.
And Lynn Rollins would always tell Carley, honor your audience. And not only by being respectful and that sort of thing, and always, you know, taking a picture with them or being kind to them and everything, but you have to honor your audience by studying and knowing the game. And one of the things she would always say is like, women in sports. Okay, well, Carley could never play football. I mean, she didn't. Let's face it, she was 100 pounds, 5 foot, and she was female. She's not going to play football. So, you know, how do you counteract the comments that, well, you've never played football, you've never been, you know, in the inside of the game and that sort of thing? And she said, no, I would never be in the inside of the game, but I was in the inside of the NFL. And I was in the war room, and I studied, and I asked people, and I talked to people, and I did my job to honor my audience, to give the best reporting that I could give. And so she did a lot of that type of things.
I just think her work ethic in general was just so admirable. And I think that's a work ethic so many people need nowadays. Like, I think I like to pride myself on my work ethic, that I try to, you know, put my best foot forward every day. But yeah, her work ethic, like I was like reading about all the things that she was doing all at one time. She's working 7 days a week. I'm like, girl, how do you have time to sleep? Like, you know, how do you have time to, you know, go do something for yourself or something like that? Do you think maybe sometimes working that much exhausted her mentally, or what, did she kind of like love every second of it?
I think she loved every second of it, and she loved being in the game. When she got married, I think all of a sudden she realized, uh-oh, you know, I have a husband whom I love, and then where are kids going to fit into this? Because she was, she loved kids. In the original scheme of things, you know, Mom, I want 5 kids. And she was great with kids. And, you know, she and Stephen were figuring it out as to, you know, how can we make this happen and have kids and have a life. And there were times that she would ask me, Mom, do you think women can really have it all? And the answer is, you know, I don't think you can. I do believe at some time or another, she couldn't have worked at this intensity and have had a family that supported, or that was supported by her. However, I will say that I think once you get into the big networks and everything, you only work one sport.
Right.
And so if she would have worked only football, let's say, then she would have been off for basketball, baseball, and that sort of thing. And she could have been the mom figure in the family while, you know, while she and Stephen evolved with that. So I do think she was headed toward easier times and headed toward the answer to that.
Yeah.
But, you know, she never got that answer.
I think that's a very real question that is not really talked about all that much in, especially with women in the sports world, that, you know, working this job, it doesn't matter what level you're at. You can be at, you know, in the middle of nowhere working at a really small station, or you can be, you know, at a major national network, and your schedule is nights, weekends, holidays, because sports happens on nights, weekends, and holidays. And so it's very hard for, I've even thought about it, you know, in the future, if that was, you know, in the cards for me, because I was like, how are you going to do it? You know, it's not a typical 9 to 5, like Monday through Friday and everything. And I remember reading that in the book that she was trying to figure out how this was going to work, but she was really focused on her career, and she wasn't going to let anyone deter her from that. Right.
And, you know, she was blessed in the fact that Stephen came from a sports family. Yeah. And so Stephen got her and understood her because Stephen understood the game of sports and how you have to climb your way up, you know. I mean, he grew up with a family of, you know, a dad being a big name coach. And so he understood that it took the dedication that it did for her to do her job. So that was the blessing. How it would have evolved 5 years later, I don't, you know, unfortunately we don't know. But I think it would have evolved and she would have figured it out. I do.
I mean, it seems like she's figured everything else out. It doesn't seem like there's anything she couldn't handle at that point. I don't know if I read this in the book or I saw it somewhere. I can't exactly remember. Stephen, he's a high school football coach now.
He is.
Doesn't he honor Carley and tribute Carley by having every quarterback he has wear, or every team he has wear a sticker with her initials on it?
With his initials on it, and then he tapes his fingers up, and I don't know the significance of that because I'm not the sports guru, but he tapes his fingers up and he has CME, which was Carley McCord Ensminger. And that was, it's a little bit of funniness in that, and the fact that when they did get married, she was like, Stephen, I'm going to continue to be Carley McCord.
I remember reading about that.
And he was like, well, why don't you want to be Carley McCord Ensminger? And she said, because I don't want people to think that I got the job because of the last name of Ensminger. I earned the job as Carley McCord. And he said, but it's such a good name. And she goes, I know. But that was one of the things. So right before she had passed away, she had the Christmas the Christmas before, and Christmas was December 25th, and December 28th was the death of Carley. And she went to change her license because she wanted to show him that she was going to be Carley McCord Ensminger. And so,
I think that's so beautiful.
Yeah, it is. And did she have an inkling that something was going on? I really do believe that, because the night before the plane crash, she was very concerned about getting on that plane.
Yeah.
And I do believe somewhere along the line, and that goes back to the earlier discussion as well, I think she knew her time was coming up.
Going back to you, did writing this book bring you some sense of peace and healing throughout this journey?
Most definitely. It brought me to a sense of peace. Grief is hard. And I don't want people to look at this and say, oh, look at her 5 years later, because at any given moment, I think I told you this before the interview, I could break down and cry. And so it is it is something I have to live with. It is my new normal. It is my family's new normal. But this book, it started out with grief. I thought this was going to be a book, and it is a great book. If you have somebody who's grieving for anything, give them the book, because it talks about grief a lot, but it also talks about a lot of hope, and it gives a lot of, it's for young people to realize that you have to work in your 20s and 30s, because adulting is hard, and it's not going to just come to you. You have to go to it. Yep. And so at first the book was, like I said, it started out as a tragedy, but it evolved into so many other aspects. And now when people say, well, who do you suggest to read the book? I'm like, LSU, you should buy it for your journalism students to read.
I agree.
Colleges need to have it in every library, because it is more than just grief. It's also grief, tragedy, connected to a lot of love and a lot of hope. Yeah.
How are you and your family doing? How do you keep Carley's memory alive and, just living your new normal?
Right. Well, at first, we all, my husband went inward, I went outward. Kaylee, my daughter, did a foundation, Little Rainbows, and she gave money to Matt Moscona's son has congenital heart failure, and so so Carley's foundation goes to that foundation's, her funds go to that foundation. And and then my son was the rock of the family, and is, still is considered to be the rock of the family. I noticed that our first holidays were quite sad and quite just
you felt the
missing.
void.
Yes, but now we can laugh. Like this last Christmas, we could laugh. But, Aunt Cuckoo always comes into the conversation, and Carley always comes into the conversation, and, she always makes her way into the conversation. But I notice it's more of, Carley would have done this, as opposed to, Carley's not here.
Yeah.
So it is an evolution, and it's a beautiful evolution. It's still a sad evolution every now and then. Not every now and then.
It's not linear. Healing's not linear.
No, it is not. And like I said, at any given moment, any one of us could cry, and we understand. But then at any given moment, we found laughter again. We found joy in our hearts again. Even if we let it in for, 15 minutes a day, we can find the happiness as well as the sadness. And I have learned that I owe that to my kids who are living. If I just shut down in a cocoon of sorrow, I would not be doing my kids and my grandkids and my future generation, I would be doing them an injustice. And so my husband and I had to realize we had to put laughter back into the family, because that was how the family was going to heal. And so that's a big key in grief. Of course you're going to feel angry. Of course you're going to be sad. Of course you're going to be mad and just don't talk to me. But at the end of the day, you can't give that poison to the future generations.
Right.
You have to find joy, laughter, and happiness.
One last question for you. How do you want people to remember Carley? What do you want her legacy to be?
Hardworking, outworks the competition, loving, happiness, raw, goofy. She was goofy. I know you said you met her, but I don't know. She would go in the middle of the Superdome on the 50-yard line, and she would do a cartwheel. I mean, and, you know, she didn't care if Drew Brees had seen her, Sean Payton had seen her and everything. You know, if she was just warming up, or you could see Carly dancing on the sidelines. Or she would ride, she loved mascots, and, you know, she would do Pierre the Pelican, and she would just be a silly, you know, or you know, Gumbo, the mascot on the Saints. Or she would sit in production meetings, and she would hold her hair up, and she'd do the you know, the hairbrush as her microphone, and she would sing, and she was just a fun, loving person. But she wasn't always serious. She was very fun and silly and serious and joyful and loving. And sometimes she drove me crazy as a daughter, you know? I mean, we would fight, and, you know, in the book,
I relate to that.
Yeah, you see us, you know, she blew her tops, and, you know, Mom wasn't happy, and, you know, I mean, so, you know, there were mother and daughter conflicts and everything. But in the end, I can honestly say she was a good human. And that's what brings me the most joy, is the fact that, God, thank you for letting me, or giving me the privilege to be the temporary mom of this fantastically imperfect, perfect human being.
That's so beautiful.
Thank you.
Where can people find this book if they want to grab a copy of it?
They can actually find it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble, Ingram Sparks, any of those. You could ask your bookstores. They can order it for them.
Awesome.
And hopefully it's going to go into, you know, some other avenues besides just book forums. So we're keeping our fingers crossed on that. But there's some things in the works that might catch interest in a lot of the sports world.
Well, congratulations on
you.
an incredible book. It's very moving, very touching, touches on a lot of different things, but it's not a sad book. It's a very positive and happy book, and you feel a lot of feelings when you read this. You don't even have to know who Carly was to be inspired by this book. So it's called Only Rainbows, the Carley McCord Story, written by Miss Karen McCord. Thank you so much for joining the podcast today.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed having you.
Oh, man, you're good.
Thank you so much.
You're good. You're going to be on the national stage one day, too.
Oh, gosh, thank you so much.
You are. Thank you. It was an honor. It was a privilege.